Hey guys, Ben here with Oddly Armed, and today I'm coming at you with another gun review. This time we're going to be taking a look at the Heckler & Koch G36. Now this isn't an actual H&K G36, this is a TommyBuilt T36, which is a US made clone of the G36. But essentially, as far as all the mechanical workings and everything go, it's the same thing. So let's go ahead, talk about the history of the G36 and get in a close look at how I have mine set up. And real quick, I want to give a big thanks to the Echo Valley Training Center. I've done a lot of the accuracy testing for my guns out there, and I've done some training out there, so I want to give them a big thanks. And if you're in the DC metro area, please look at them for potential competitions or shooting days. But to start with the history of the G36, we actually got to go back all the way to the late 1950s. And when the German army, the Bundeswehr, had adopted their new battle rifle to replace the Kar-98K and some of the rifles that they were using in the Second World War. So what they ended up going with is this. So this is an H&K G3, this one's a PTR-91, but essentially this is a 308 battle rifle with a roller delay blowback action. And for its time, it was actually a very, very good rifle. However, by the 70s and the 80s, one of the main things that West Germany was looking at the time was a 5.56 or a more intermediate caliber rifle. Because at that point, the US had already adopted 5.56 and other NATO countries were also looking at an intermediate caliber. Now, the West Germans wanted to be a little bit different, so they were looking at developing something that used caseless ammunition, and that was the H&K G11 program. And that was a really, really cool rifle with an incredibly complex inner working that never really came to fruition. So through the 70s and the 80s, they did a lot of development into the G11. However, in the 1990s, early 1990s, the Soviet Union dissolved. And at that point, East Germany and West Germany reunified, and the Germans at that point had quite a bit to deal with as far as reunifying the country. So this very expensive weapons program, going for the hypervelocity full auto version of the G11, was kind of put on the back burner. At that point, the German military was still using the G3, which was getting really, really old at that point. So they were looking for a more simple, just standard 5.56 replacement. Now, at the time, H&K already made the H&K 33, which was essentially a 5.56 version of the G3, or so it's a scaled up MP5 or scaled down G3. But that wasn't what the German army was really looking for. And H&K even upgraded the H&K 33 to the G41, which got rid of some of the proprietary features of the H&K 33. So the 30-round magazine that they originally went with, they dropped that in favor of a Stanag magazine, so that would be compatible with other NATO rifles. However, it still was pretty heavy and a little bit complicated to make, and it was also an aging design being made out of stamped steel, in a roller delay blowback action. So H&K went back to the drawing board and went to go look at something that was a little bit more modern than the H&K 33. And this is what H&K came up with. So the G36 was actually an incredibly advanced design for the time. As far as the action goes, it's essentially an AR-180 style design. So it's AR-180 style bolt carrier group, as well as a gas system, which is really derived from the AR-180. However, this was a very advanced rifle as far as construction goes. So it had a polymer receiver with basically a steel component, a steel trunnion embedded into it, and then a ton of polymer parts, polymer pistol grip, polymer stock, everything on this that could be polymer is polymer. So this design was finalized in 1995 and started going into production in 1996 and started to equip the Bundeswehr and replace the G3. In 1998, another big occurrence for the G36 was the Spanish military, which at the time was using the Set Miel, which is, I'll be doing a video on that later on. However, it was one of the roughest rifles in all of NATO at that time. So they were looking to replace that, and they decided to go with the G36. Now, the G36 was actually considered fairly inexpensive compared to a lot of rifles, and a lot of that has to do with the polymer construction on it, which really dropped the price down, which is weird because when you think of Heckler & Koch, you don't think well priced, you think very expensive but well made. And real quick, I kind of want to talk about the models of the G36. Now, to start out with, the original model of the G36 that equipped the German military was just a standard G36, and that came equipped with, I believe, an 18.1 inch barrel, And then the optic it came with is the one I have on here, which this is kind of anachronistic because this is a G36C, and you usually don't see this, which is a Hensoldt dual optic on one of these rifles. But it was kind of an interesting optic for the 1990s, and it comes equipped with both a 3-power scope in the bottom here, so this bottom section is a scope, and then in the top section here there's actually a pretty primitive red dot, and it's powered with a fiber optic. So if I pull back on this cover, you can kind of see there's a little fiber optic window in there that gathers light and illuminates the reticle, and also has a battery as well. So really interesting optic, which has not really aged all that well, but that is the original version of the G36 as adopted by the Bundeswehr. HK also made the G36K, or a carabiner, and that was the 12.5-ish inch version of the G36. So that's your carbine length rifle. And then the one I have here is the G36C, or basically compact or commando, I guess is a big one, but they got sued for Colt on that. But essentially this is an 8.9 inch PDW length version of the G36. Also made a couple of different models as far as an export series go. So the G36E was their export gun, and the biggest external difference that you're going to see with those is going to be with the optic it comes equipped with. So it had this same style of optic, except it didn't have the red dot on it, so it was just the scope here in the bottom, and instead of being 3-power, it's a 1.5-power optic. So that's the main external difference you're going to see with the E series. The last one I'll talk about is going to be the MG36. So that's essentially a G36 that's been turned into kind of a squad automatic weapon style of rifle. So that's going to have the original 18.1 inch length barrel. However, it's going to be at a heavier profile, so to help with having heavier volume of fire over time. And then it also came equipped with the same optic here, all of that bipod as well on the handguard. So it was really just your SAW version of the G36. And that wasn't very long-lived. The German army tested it out. They equipped some troops with it for a little while, and then they discovered that really the only difference is a slightly heavier barrel. So it didn't provide a big enough upgrade over the standard G36 to really continue manufacturing it. And now we can get into the really big controversy with the G36. So it went through the 2000s without having too many issues. However, when it got into 2012, the Bundeswehr started having some major issues, or at least the German government as a whole had issues with the G36. And that was due to having it overheat in service in Afghanistan, so you already had fairly high temperatures there. And if you put a high volume of fire through a G36, the reports were that the accuracy degraded to a point where it was no longer usable past around 200 meters, which is not a great situation to be in. However, I'm not going to get too deep into this entire situation because it's really, really muddy when you start looking into it. But essentially, it might have been a political thing more than an actual issue. And then that's a problem that you're going to have with a lot of rifles, where it was never originally designed to have a really high volume of fire like a machine gun. And when you push a rifle past what it was designed for, you're going to see groups open up, you're going to see reliability drop, stuff like that. So the German government sued H&K over it, but in the end, HK won out, but they still wanted to get rid of the G36. And I'm not going to go too deep into the trials that followed them wanting to get rid of the G36, because those have their own controversies and their own kind of drama going into it between Haenel, which had the MK556, and then H&K, who had their basically the HK416A5 or A7, so their newest variant. There was a lot of headbutting and back and forth about that, and patent infringement, stuff like that. But at the end of all that drama, the HK417A7 was what was selected to replace the G36. Now, despite the German military looking at phasing out and replacing the G36, this rifle has still seen a ton of use and has a ton of customers around the world. So, I mean, I'm not even going to be able to begin naming all of them, just given how many countries have adopted this in some capacity. But some of the real big ones are like Latvia and Lithuania adopted this as their primary rifle. And then, of course, Spain as well. In smaller numbers, you see it in other countries as well. So Saudi Arabia has some, Argentina, like you can go down the list of countries and you're pretty much going to find everyone has some form of a G36. Another big one is going to be police units. So again, the G36 overall is one of the less expensive rifles for something like a police unit to adopt. So particularly in Europe, you're going to see a lot of police units using the G36. And famously, if you see in the UK, police officers with the UK police are going to be using a G36 if they have a rifle more often than not. So you'll see these pop up a lot in law enforcement circles. And that really covers the military history of the G36. So as far as the history on the US civilian market goes, there has been a form of the G36 coming into the US since the early 2000s, and that's the SL8. Now that's really a neutered G36. So due to German export laws, you can't export the G36 in this form. You have to give it a single stack magazine, and they had to change out the receiver, give it a huge heavy barrel, and essentially make the rifle way worse than it is in its original G36 form. So the SL8 has been on the US market for quite a while now, and there's been a couple of companies that have really taking SL8s and converting them back to the original G36 form. So basically lightening the profile of the barrel, modifying the receiver so it takes the original G36 stock, and can also take the double stack magazine, stuff like that. And TommyBuilt is one of the big companies, or the guys, Tom Bostic, who was one of the go-tos for that conversion process. And he would also take SL8s and convert them into an XM8, which is another really cool rifle I would like to get my hands on, but he was one of the main ones for the G36. Now in around 2018, Tom Bostic was actually looking at basically producing a US-made version of the G36, and this was the outcome of that project for him, and that is the T36. So now we're going to get into a little bit of controversy on that, because in the first 2 years, I think it was around 2019, the T36 had to be recalled due to the ATF finding that the receiver was essentially a machine gun. And couldn't be modified, you couldn't change it out or anything like that. You had to destroy the receiver of the rifle. Mine is actually one of the early T36s, and so I actually emailed TommyBuilt back in the day about that, and was going to send it to him to swap out the receiver to the new TG36 receiver, which was essentially the ATF finally approved version of the G36 receiver that he had. Somehow mine, which is an incredibly low serial number, actually fell outside of the range that the ATF was requesting be destroyed. So I was actually able to keep my original T36 receiver. So it's really cool. I'll roll in a picture of that email chain from TommyBuilt to CYA for that one. But yeah, essentially that was a huge controversy because people had to pay to send in their rifles to him. The receiver would be destroyed, and then he would have to replace all the parts onto a new TG36 receiver. Now, as of early 2025, TommyBuilt is actually defunct. So back in January, so last month, he announced that TommyBuilt was no longer going to be making guns or gun parts anymore, and he had sold off like the rights to the T7, so his MP7 clone, and then was no longer going to be producing the G36. So these are no longer on the market from TommyBuilt. However, there are other companies that are looking to fill that space as well. Def Guns makes receivers for the G36, and then GSG9, I believe, still makes parts kits that HK Parts carries. So you are not completely out of luck if you are looking for a G36 style of rifle or clone. And then the SL8s are still coming in, and HK has kind of teased that they might be looking at bringing in a non-neutered version of the G36 since they're stepping up production here in the US. So the export law isn't necessarily as big of an issue, but that still has yet to be seen. So as of right now, you still have a couple of options. And that is going to do it for the history of the G36. So let's go ahead, get in a close-in look at mine and see how I have it set up. All right, so starting at the front here, I do have a Chemo muzzle device on this because I do run this rifle suppressed, even though it is not the best suppressor host. And then up above there, you can see the gas block and the vent hole there that allows excess gas to escape. The handguard I have on here is a B&T tri-rail handguard. It's more of a quad rail, I guess, but I also have an HK Parts grip on here, which is kind of the classic KAC style of grip. And then moving up, you can see the charging handle for the G36. And that's one of the more iconic features of this rifle since it is reciprocating, but it runs underneath the charging handle where it's protected. At the front of the carry handle, you can see there is a hole because the optic, as you can see right there, is inside of the carry handle, and that is a 3-power scope on this one. And then up above there is the aperture for the red dot sight. And then if we come back, again, this is a Hensoldt dual optic. You can see the controls there, so you just have on and off for the red dot, and then there's your scope with very short eye relief, terrible eye box, and really kind of a difficult to use optic overall. But again, it is from the 90s. Now moving down, you can see our G36 magazine. So this is one of the original ones, and it has the knobs on there so you can lock magazines together. You can actually swap out the magazine well to work with STANAG magazines, but that's basically it there. Safety selector is very nice on this rifle. However, it does feel pretty plasticky. And then you can see our trigger group in there. And that is actually our bolt hold open, that lever at the front of the trigger well. And then that's also a bolt release. You can see we have a paddle style magazine release as well. And then this one actually has little protrusions on it so you can hit it with your trigger finger as well, so you don't need to hit it with your thumb. And then moving back, we do have a folding stock on the G36 as well. And on the left side, there's not going to be a whole lot more to see. So we got the same gas block and the muzzle device up there, our handguard, as well as the dual optic. One other thing, you can see there's a couple of holes in the top. That's actually for a night vision device, which can be fitted to the 3-power optic. However, I don't have one of those, and I have never seen one. But going down from there, just see our markings, the magazine, and our controls again. They are all fully ambidextrous, so that is very, very nice. And then we have the folding stock again, which you can see the button there on the left side, which allows you to fold it. And that's really all we have to go over on the G36. Let's go ahead and kick off the ratings with accuracy. And the T36 is going to get a score of 3. At 100 yards using 55 grain M193 ammunition, I was able to get a group of about 3.1 MOA. So not fantastic. However, again, this optic is fairly dated, but it is 3-power and usable at that distance. So not the greatest accuracy possible, but still not terrible. And next up, we have Aftermarket, where the G36 and the T36 is going to get a score of 3. Now, there's a couple of different companies making parts for the G36. One of the big ones is, of course, H&K. So some of the different parts they make are different rails for this. So you have like the IDZ rail, which has built-in folding iron sights, or the original G36C rail, which also has built-in iron sights. And then they also make different stock options. So they have the IDZ, which is a folding, collapsing stock that also has a cheek riser, as well as a KE style stock, which is adjustable for length of pull as well. So those are some of your big options from H&K that you can swap out. Now, B&T also makes parts for the G36, and the main one that they're going to make are rail systems. So like this is a B&T quad rail that I have on my G36. So they make links for all the different styles of G36 rifles, so you can get those for that. As far as the rail system goes, KAC, so Knights Armament Company, used to make rails for the G36, but those are incredibly rare and expensive. They also made iron sight sets, which are really interesting because it has a rear rail and a front sight without the carry handle. So they aren't connected. There is some talk that might actually have some issues because the carry handle actually adds to the rigidity of the receiver, but those are really cool looking and people tend to like those a lot. Now, I believe Troy Industries actually made a rail for the G36 for a little while, as well as Spure. They still make G36 parts, which are very, very high quality, but they can be very difficult to find and expensive. And then as far as optics go, so Hensoldt makes this optic, and I don't know if they're actually still in production for the dual optics, but these can be very hard to find and very expensive when you do find them. The 1.5 power or 3 power single optics are actually quite a bit easier to find and less expensive, but that is one of the cool options for, like, generally for the G36K or the full-size G36. You don't see these a lot on the Cs. As far as other parts go, Spur also makes magwells for the G36, which allows it to use standard AR-15 style magazines, so that's a pretty cool upgrade there. TommyBuilt Tactical actually made quite a few different parts options for the G36 when he was still in business. So I don't know how many of those are going to still be available. You might have to hunt around for them. But some of the things he made were different rails for the G36. So he made just a standard Picatinny rail and also another one which kind of mimics the look of this, the 3-pyro carry handle, except with a Picatinny rail at the back so you can add your own optic. He also made M-lock handguards, as well as a handguard which actually had an MP7 style grip on it, as well as different brace options. So a lot of these come in or start as pistols, so they have like a tailhook brace adapter for the G36. And then he also made, for the G36, lower receiver housing, which would take standard AR-15 trigger groups as well as safeties and AR-15 style pistol grips. So that's a really cool option too if you can find one of those. Now, as far as durability goes, I'm going to give the T36 a 3, and this is one where I think it's actually going to be a departure from the actual H&K G36. The polymer is okay on this rifle. The parts were originally made by GSG9, which is a US-made company. They're not going to be as nice as German parts, so the durability is going to suffer a little bit. So I've definitely got some wear on my my bolt as well as the trunnion on the inside of the receiver. So this is not the most durable rifle that I own for sure. Now let's get into the ergonomics, where I'm going to give the G36 a score of 3. So let's go ahead and start looking at the controls. At the front, we don't have an adjustable gas block, so there's nothing that we can do there. But one of the most famous parts of the G36, and one of my favorite parts, is going to be this charging handle, which is the world's most expensive fidget spinner. So this thing pops out to either the left or the right side, so it is fully ambidextrous. If you press it in, it locks in place and acts as a forward assist. It is reciprocating, but it is inside of the charging handle, so you're not likely to have it get in the way at all. But essentially, you just pull it out to the side, and then you pull back on it, and that's going to go ahead and open your bolt there. So looking at the controls down in the pistol grip, we have our magazine release, which is going to be paddle style here, right at the front. And again, mine actually comes with these little ledges on the side, which allows you to press down on it without having to use your thumb. Inside of the trigger guard, again, this is not a design that I like, but that is going to be your bolt release right here. So you can see it's got this little leg here. If you press down on it, that's going to drop your bolt. Now this is also your bolt hold open, so if you come in here with your finger, there's a little bit of a ledge. It is very difficult to actually use. It's not my favorite design, but you can lock the bolt open by going in there with your finger, lifting up on that. Now as far as the safety selector goes, it is fully ambidextrous. It is very easy to actuate, but it does feel super plasticky, so that's really the only downside there. But it's really not bad. It's where you want it to be. It's nice. I really don't have major complaints besides the plasticky feel. Now as far as the dual optic goes, we can take a look at that real quick. If I turn this on, you can see there we have the dot. That's your only control on this cool dual optic here. And then up here at the top, you can see that is where we have that little fiber optic there. So that illuminates the reticle while it's daylight bright outside. And that trapdoor just closes up there. Now, as far as the stock goes, the only control that we have for this standard skeleton stock is going to be our button to fold it. So you just press that in and the stock will fold to the side. And then you can see right there we have our shell deflector, and it'll just lock over that. And then to release it, all you gotta do is pull up a little bit, pull it over, and then just give it a little snap, and it'll lock back in place. And that's really all we have to go over for the ergonomics. And next up we have maintenance, where I'm gonna go ahead and give the G36 a score of 4. So as far as disassembly goes, it is very easy with this rifle. It's not really difficult to do at all. And the receiver is fairly open, so you have enough room in there to really clean it out and give it a good wash out. So I don't really have any complaints as far as that goes. Now, as far as getting replacement parts for the G36, it's actually surprisingly easy, all things considered. So again, GSG9 is still making parts for it. So again, you can get things like bolts, extractors, bolt carrier groups, stuff like that fairly easily. They are a little bit on the expensive side though, so that's the place where I'm going to be dropping that point off. But again, maintenance on the G36 is not terrible. And next up we have modularity, where I'm going to go ahead and give the G36 a score of 4. There's quite a bit on this rifle that you can swap out. So starting with the stock, it's held on with a roll pin back here, but you can knock that out. And there are different options. However, the German ones, like the IDZ stock, are going to be very difficult and expensive to get. So that's really what's going to hold you back there. Now, as far as pistol grip goes, there's several different options, so you can swap that out. And again, there's a TommyBuilt one that gives you the option to swap it to an AR grip, AR trigger. So that's an option that would be very, very nice if you can find it, because again, those have been out of production for some time. There's different optics options. So you have, again, the carry handle optic, but then you can get a Picatinny rail for it. And there's quite a few different options as far as Picatinny rails for the G36 goes. So you can get polymer rail, aluminum rail. There's quite a bit that you can really swap out there. Handguards, again, are going to be very easy to swap on the G36. So you just knock out a single pin, it pulls off. And if you can get a replacement handguard, that just comes on super, super simply there. So that is a really cool modular feature as well on this. The magazine well is another really modular feature, because you can pop that off and swap it with a Stanag 15 or Stanag magazine wells. Takes an AR-15 style magazine. And then really the only thing that is not super modular about this rifle is barrel swapping. So you can actually pull the barrel out of this rifle kind of like with an AR-15. So you do have a barrel nut in the receiver. You're going to want a mandrel to hold your receiver on though, and then you need to have a kind of a long proprietary wrench to get the barrel nut off. But you can pull the barrel nut and pull your barrel out and swap it to a different length. And then TommyBuilt actually made 300 blackout kits for the G36 for a little while. Now again, those might be difficult to find nowadays, but overall it's a fairly modular platform. Now when it comes to price, I'm going to give the T36 a score of 2. That's because they're still fairly expensive. You're looking from the $2,500 to all the way up to $3,000 range for the T36 or TG36. The SL8 is actually fairly inexpensive. Those are less than $1,500. However, you're still going to be investing another $1,000 on top of that to convert it to a G36 style rifle. So again, it's fairly expensive to get the rifle in the style it's meant to be. And next up we have shooting characteristics, where I'm going to go ahead and give the T36 a score of 3. So starting out with the trigger, biggest thing we have to talk about is the trigger feel is not great. And that's really because most of the internals on the trigger group are polymer. So you're getting a lot of plastic on plastic action, so it feels plasticky. You got some sponginess and some creep to it a little bit too as well. So the G36 is not known for having a particularly good trigger. It does come in at about 7 pounds and 11 ounces as well, so it's definitely on the heavy side, but it's still usable. I wouldn't necessarily be swapping this out for an AR-15 trigger unless I had to. As far as the recoil impulse goes, this is a light rifle, so it's going to be fairly snappy. It's also pretty well overgassed, so the bolt carrier group moves at a pretty good velocity and you do get a bit of a kick out of it. It's not painful or anything like that, but it is a little bit snappy. Now, suppressing the T36 is actually pretty difficult. So I used to use this with my Saker 762, which is a full back pressure can. The issue with that is this thing is very overgassed with that can on it. The biggest problem with it is it has a non-adjustable gas block, and essentially it just has a hole in the front which vents excess gas. But with a high back pressure can on it, it can't vent enough gas fast enough for it to have a lower recoil. So with that can on there, I was worried about this gun essentially beating itself to death over time. So I really did not shoot this suppressed very often. Now, in the last year, I did get a B&T SRBS 762, which is a lower back pressure can. And with that can on this rifle, it is actually very, very nice. So I don't have the really high bolt velocity. It seems pretty well gassed with the low back pressure can. So I am definitely comfortable using it with that can on there. But again, that is something to keep in mind if you are looking at getting one of these rifles. Now we're going to get into reliability, where this rifle is going to take a hit and get a score of 2. So my experience with the T36 has not been problem-free. So right out the gate, I was one of the very, very early adopters of this. As soon as the receivers hit the market, I bought one. And then I also bought a GSG9 parts kit from H&K Parts and had it sent to Tommy, who actually constructed the rifle, put it together and everything. And off the bat, I had some issues. The biggest one that required me to send parts to Tommy to get fixed was with the pistol grip. So I did have hammer follow out the gate with this rifle, and that means it essentially went full auto without me meaning to, which sounds great, but it's actually kind of dangerous, and it's a little scary when it actually happens. So I sent that to him. He replaced some springs in the trigger group, and that problem went away entirely. So now it's just single shot, semi-auto, no issues there. I still do have reliability issues with this rifle though, and I'm not entirely sure if it's mostly magazine related, but the second to last shot in most magazines, I have some sort of a malfunction. So I'll either have a stovepipe or a failure to chamber, something like that. Don't know why that happens, but that's been pretty consistent, and that's where I'm gonna have to be dropping off some points there. And the last category is going to be weight, and that's where the G36 does incredibly well, so it's going to get a 4 in that category. The G36C comes in at a weight of 6.2 pounds, and a lot of that is due to the construction of the rifle being primarily made out of polymer. It is very, very lightweight. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories, we come out with a score of 31 for the T36, which puts it in the B tier. So there really aren't any particularly high points for this rifle. It's fairly modular, but again, the parts aren't super available, so that's not really going to help you out a whole lot. Some of the downsides where this gets let down, for one, is going to be the reliability that I've had with my T36. Now, I wouldn't expect that to be the case for an H&K made G36 necessarily, but that's been something that's really kind of let it down. And again, these are fairly pricey for what they are. And the final thing that we're going to talk about is going to be where I think this fits in as far as my cool tier goes. And I'll be honest, G36 is going straight up into the S tier. This is one of the most iconic rifles in my mind. Might not be the most practical rifle, but god damn does this thing look cool. So this has an incredible pop culture impact over the years. So just thinking, I'm a child of the 90s, so I grew up looking at this as one of the really cool looking rifles in different movies. So you have like Underworld back in the day, or Tomb Raider again was another movie where it popped up. There was a ton of different movie appearances for the G36, particularly in the 2000s, because this was one of the most modern, futuristic looking rifles on the market. So this thing popped up freaking everywhere in action movies, and to include more recently, like John Wick 3, there was a G36 in there as well. So even today, this is a very futuristic, cool looking rifle that you're going to see pop up in movies. Now, as far as video games, it's essentially the same deal. So again, this popped up in like Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, the very original one, and basically all of your modern Call of Duty games after that, all the Battlefield games, any game set in a modern setting is going to have some variant of the G36 in it, because again, this rifle looks so freaking cool. And then just from a personal note, I remember going to a Gander Mountain when I was a kid, and they had an airsoft version of the G36, and it actually had like a fake version of the dual optic on there, and I thought it was one of the coolest looking guns I had ever seen. So that was why I love the G36 so much, because it actually got me into guns to begin with. So this thing is shooting straight up into the S tier, and honestly towards the top of it. And that's going to close us out for my review on the H&K G36, or in this case, a TommyBuilt T36. So thank you guys for coming along and checking it out. Please like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more videos coming up, and you guys have a wonderful day.